A Pan-Africanist is somebody who holds the view, and does not only hold the view, but is convicted that Africa can only realize her potential if her citizens recognize that the boundaries that were bequeathed to us by the colonialists are artificial, and that the sooner we begin to engage as one people, the safer we are. We must remind ourselves that Africa will only realize our potential if the former French colonies recognize that they are not French and do not behave as if they are. If the former British colonies recognize that they are Africans and stop behaving as if they are Africans. And if the former Portuguese colonies recognize that they are Africans and begin to behave as if they are Africans, for the moment, our dominant default instinct is to behave as if we are the people who colonized us. And I'll be speaking to this a little bit later in detail, but that is my concern. So to be an African is to recognize that we are an integral part of this continent. We want her to see grow our economy. We want free movement of labor. You know, when I travel from Nairobi and I arrive at the Kotoka airport and I'm asked for a passport, I get annoyed. When I'm asked for a yellow fever certificate, the American will fly from Boston to Los Angeles. One currency, no passport, after 6 hours. I travel from Nairobi to Uganda after 30 minutes. I am confronted with Ugandan shilling. I go to Rwanda after 1 hour, I'm confronted with the Rwandese franc and a different language. And Africans don't recognize this. There is a speech that I've listened to by Samora Moses Machel, and he says, tongue-in-cheek, that in his younger days he heard Africans boasting, those who were colonized by the French, that we are better than you. We were colonized by the French who are civilized. And those who are colonized by the British saying, we are better than you. We were colonized by people who are orderly, and you Mozambicans and Angolans and Cape Verdeans, you are colonized by the most backward nation in Europe. And he say, it's like those who are enslaved saying, my slave master is better than your slave master. But you are all enslaved. And we must exercise the ghost of inferiority and recognize that we are not children of a lesser God.
Where did Nkrumah, Nyerere, Kenyatta, Banda, and the first generation of African leaders, where did they go wrong? Because you spoke about the missing generation. The ideas of these men appear to be in line with what you're saying. What happened to them? After the late 60s, everything just came down, and it looks like that all the nice things Nkrumah said, all the great things Nyerere wanted to do, somehow if they woke up today and came back to Africa, they would be totally shocked. What happened?
I've said it before, and I think they would be shocked. But remember, and I think it's Nkrumah who gets it right. Nkrumah recognizes as early as 1958 that the neo-colonial project came alive immediately the colonial project was terminated. So that the imperialists were ahead of the game always. They were ahead of the game in Belgian Congo when they conspired to remove Patrice Emery Lumumba. They wanted somebody who would continue the neo-colonial project. When they came to Ghana here, there is a sense in which they did not like Nkrumah, because Nkrumah had a completely different agenda, and you can go down and recognize that the agenda was to ensure that we continue with these neo-colonial projects. I look at the speeches that were delivered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1963, the 32 leaders who were present at that time. Each one of them, there are no speeches ever delivered at the OAU or African Union like those speeches. The clarity of mind, the clarity of vision, the conviction. Nkrumah was so clear. He says, let us do the things that we must do now. Let us unite now. Let us have one passport now. Let us have one army now. Because if we allow ourselves to get used to these little boundaries, we'll be divided. And immediately, you could see at that time, the French were already recruiting Leopold Sédar Senghor, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, on their side, Kamuzu Banda, on their side. And that is why Nyerere, who disagreed with Nkrumah in 1994, said, Nkrumah was right, we were wrong. And there is a sense, therefore, in which the first generation leaders knew what they wanted, but the forces that were arrayed against them were so clear and so focused to ensure that they did not succeed, that they started recruiting other agents provocateurs. Look, the first coup in Africa is in 1960 against Sylvanus Olympio. So within 1 year of independence, a coup has been mounted. Look at what happens with Patrice Emery Lumumba in 1961. They're already removing him. Look at what happened to Kwame Nkrumah. And you will note that in the 1960s, if there was not a coup d'etat, there was a mutiny. In your own country, there was a successful coup against Nkrumah. In Nigeria, a successful coup against the Azikiwe government. In Kenya, in 1971, there was a mutiny. In Tanzania, a mutiny. In Uganda, a coup d'etat. They used to say that coups became as frequent as breakfast in Africa, but even breakfast was not that frequent.
Amazing stuff. We're talking to Professor P.A.V. Lumumba, who is our keynote speaker at the P.A.V Memorial Lecture tonight at least at 5 p.m. And we're already sold out. It's a free event, but we've been totally overwhelmed. We'll talk a bit more about that. Just a few more points to get our minds thinking right before we come and listen to you. I get the sense that our biggest challenge as Africans is not the colonizer, but is Africans themselves who allow themselves to be used to fight against each other. How serious is this issue?
You know, there is not a single answer that addresses this issue. One can be very simplistic about it, but it must be remembered that we are, as you rightly say, co-authors of our misfortune. Remember that the colonizer knows and knew what he wanted. And remember that the battle of colonization has always been a battle of the mind. There's a book which I commend to everybody to read, which was written in 1933 by an African-American called Carter G. Woodson, called Miseducation of the Negro. In Miseducation of the Negro, it talks about how the mind is conditioned to believe that you are inferior. And I think that the first generation leaders in Africa were very clear that you've got to free the mind. So we have become our own enemies because we have failed to recognize that our problem is in the mind. Even you and me, who in our guarded moments know what is right, but if you look at our default positions, the United Kingdom knows what it wants and it works at it. They have their banks here, Barclays Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, so they control that economy and they recruit us. And you and me are proud when we say, I'm employed by Barclays, I'm employed by Standard Chartered, not by a local Ghanaian bank. When somebody visits the United States of America, they must tell you, I was in the United States of America. But when they visit Nairobi, they don't want to talk about it. So it is a question of the mind. And let me tell you, until the day that we actually have a mental revolution, a man called Greg Mills, a white South African who used to advise President Kagame, has written a book, Why Africans Are Poor and What They Can Do About It. And he says in a nutshell, Africans are poor because their leaders have taken the decision that they should be poor. And I add this, because Africans themselves have allowed their leaders to behave that way. And the net effect, therefore, is that if we want to change, it must start with the mind. René Descartes was right. I think, so I am. But do we think? We Africans, do we think? And if we think, what do we think about? Let me, if you give me a little latitude, just give you a few things. These phones that we buy and we love, we know that every mobile phone needs something called rare earth. The country with the largest deposit of rare earth in the world is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Who are present there now? the Chinese. They'll build you a few roads and one stadium, and then they have your rare earth for the next 200 years. But do we think? No, we don't. They build us the headquarters of the African Union, and we celebrate. Look at the mobile telephony. Who controls our mobile telephony? Who owns Tigo? Who owns Vodafone? And many others that you can go on. Look at the universities that we have. If you look at the exchange of students in Africa, how many Kenyan students are at Legon here? How many Ghanaian students are in Nairobi or in Dar es Salaam? But each one of us will proudly say and display on our car dashboards, I'm an alumni of Harvard, I'm an alumni of Stanford. Legon is the Harvard. Harvard is the Legon of that country. If I am good and I went to school in Ghana, why would I go to Harvard? If I want to study law, why would I study law, my undergraduate in Harvard? I'm studying Ghanaian law, for God's sake. But that is how we behave. If you look at the way we behave, even on mundane things like movies, and I love Nigerian movies, and I watch them deliberately in order to assert my conviction as a Pan-Africanist. They make sense to me. You have these actors from the United States are the ones that we want to follow. You have your own Jackie Appiah here, or John Dumelo, or Nadia Buhari. Why don't you celebrate them? You win an Oscar and you think it is the world. You win a Nobel Prize. Why can't we have our own Nkrumah Prize? Who says that the Nobel Prize is the best prize? Why? It's a political instrument that is now being used to give a seal of approval to those whom the whites want to use. So there are many things, but ultimately, it is the mind.
Amazing. So what do we do? I mean, it's easy to say we need to change the mind. A friend of mine said the most difficult thing to do in the world is to change your mind, because you need your mind to change your mind.
Indeed.
And so it's a very complicated construct. So I know you teach, so you are trying to get the new students to think a certain way. But we have a present reality. We have leaders, and they are working in a framework that has been bequeathed to them. So if I get elected president of Ghana today, there are relationships I must maintain. There are business entities that have huge footprints here that I can't rock the boat too much, otherwise I become like a Mugabe. How can modern day leaders confront this question of neocolonialism in a way that will not become catastrophic? Because we've seen examples of people who've tried too quickly, too soon, and things have totally worsened.
But let us be realistic. We have seen in our lifetime certain very earth-moving changes. In our own lifetime, we have seen the colonialists leave this continent. That was a major change. That was a major shift. It was not by the faint-hearted. Who believed that the colonialists, that the British could be removed? Who believed that the French could be removed? Who believed that the Portuguese could be removed? Who believed that the Spanish could be removed? It can happen. Who believed that in a number of countries which I can mention, look at the country that was formerly called Upper Volta. A young man, Thomas Sankara, comes into the scene, not very well educated, but he comes with ideas. And he changes the name of that country to Burkina Faso. He says this is the land of the Burkinabe, the land of the upright people. There is a sense in which that demonstrates to us that it can be done. But of course, the truth is that those who are in the forefront may themselves be sacrificed. Their blood may water the tree of change and democracy. Look at Ethiopia. The post-Haile Selassie Ethiopia, we have monumental changes with the Deg regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam, who messes up the country. But then a new crop of leaders with Meles Zenawi come, and Ethiopia is now moving in some useful direction. What one needs is not these episodic engagements and changes in different parts of Africa. We have seen what happened in Burkina Faso. We have seen what has happened in Ethiopia. We have seen what has happened in South Africa. What one needs is a continental approach to this issue. And can it be done? Will it be easy? It can be done. It is not going to be easy. It is not for the faint-hearted.
But I don't see which leader. Maybe the definition of leadership has to change. But if you say it's going to be a continental shift, the mechanism that exists is the AU, and the AU. I mean, it doesn't inspire confidence.
It can't happen through those.
Yeah. So is this going to happen through things like what we're doing today?
So. I think so, because when I listen to the good doctor here, the initiatives that she is taking through our African initiative, we also have something that we are doing. There are many good things that are already happening in the African continent. The only problem is that we are not coordinated. If you look at, and I love this example that is to be drawn in from the Bible in the book of Kings, and is about the story of Elijah. He tells the Israelites, don't be of two opinions. If God is God, worship him. If Baal is Baal, worship him. And he says and thinks that he's the only one who has not worshipped at Baal's feet. Then he's told there are 7,000 others. It is the duty of those 7,000 to meet and begin to coordinate. The mere fact that I'm here in Ghana is a statement that somebody listened to what I said and identifies with it. There are many other Africans better than us several times over who are doing and saying the same things. As I sat here, I asked myself, what must we do? Perhaps to dramatize the situation, we need a group of people who will walk from Cape Town in South Africa to Tunis in Tunisia to demonstrate that a new movement has come, and another group walking from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia to Dakar in Senegal, and another one from Accra to Algiers in Algeria. And all this is given publicity. That will be the beginning of a movement. But I'm a little bit more modest and realistic nowadays, that what I start must not be finished in my lifetime, and that this is a relay race. If we begin and understand it in that way, and the Jews have a very good model. These are individuals in your lifetime. The Jews were dispersed until 1948, but what retained them? Why is it that this community has never died, enslaved in Babylon, enslaved in Egypt, dispersed in the world, killed by Adolf Hitler, now a small state that really controls the world? We are 1 billion of us. Why are we running to Europe and America? Because we are surrendering to the reality. If you expect change to come from your elected presidents, your elected parliamentarian, those have been recruited. This is what used to be called in classical terms the comprador bourgeoisie. Those are recruits. They have bastardized democracy and they don't want the status quo to change. So change will come from outside those former structures. Perhaps.
But we can't, I understand colonialism, I understand what it's done, and know what neocolonialism means. But when we confront the question of corruption, we need a different set of, how shall I put it, a different approach, because the issue of corruption, we need to look at ourselves more now, because in the way it manifests itself in some African countries, it's not just a question of grand corruption, it's a question of even the basic things that you do, the basic services that are given, and it cascades all the way down. In your mind, what is corruption and how does it play out and how can we tackle it?
You know, corruption is a moral issue. Corruption is a legal issue. Corruption is about one's own character. And my own view is that we have allowed ourselves to be captured by desire for material things. People want to reap where they have not sown. And because we have given such great prominence to material things, if you don't have those things, then your value goes down. And each one of us potentially is a thief. And the reason why we want to be thieves is that because we want to be respected. There's somebody who has written an article in 2012 in the New Africa, and he says that he looks forward to the day when African countries will be able to say, like the Bible says of death, corruption, where is thy sting? Where is thy sting? And the reason is very simple. We adore the corrupt. I've written a small book about Kenyan politics called A Call for Hygiene in Kenyan Politics. And I say that the voter is the most corrupt individual because they want to be corrupted. And once they have been corrupted, they want to elect individuals who are going to represent them. But the truth is We know that corruption hurts us. If we have no medicine in our hospitals, it's because of corruption. If we have poor quality education, it's because of corruption. Can it change? It can. I don't think that we have reached a state of no return. The reason why Ghana as a country continues to thrive even in the midst of corruption, or Kenya or Tanzania, is because the corrupt are actually in the minority. It is because the good people are in the majority, so they make enough for these thieves to steal, and something remains to continue to drive Ghana. So what must we do is to ensure that these thieves are made to pay for their ills. The problem in Africa is impunity. We have thieves, and we know they are thieves. I went to Uganda and told them that even the churches must now refuse to accept tithe from known thieves. You tell them, if you are a thief, you can keep your money. Those are Caesar's things. You remain with them. But the problem is that every other institution is now affected. The churches are not immune. The parliamentarians, every sector of the economy. Has it been done somewhere in our lifetime? Have we dealt with corruption successfully? You go to Botswana, one of the countries that I can cite. Botswana is the only country on the continent of Africa outside of the island of Mauritius that has had a budget surplus. Because the presidents there, starting with Saseret Sekama, coming up with Kwet Masire, coming up with Festus Mogae, and now Ian Kama, hold the view that if you are caught under your minister, you will go to jail and your property will be seized and taken. But in countries where we celebrate thieves, like South African president, who we know has used his office for private benefit, and we celebrate him, like Zimbabwe, we know that an individual has refused to leave office, suffers from what I call the prima donna syndrome, the refusal by a good dancer to leave the stage, even when he or she is tired. So it can be done, and it must be done. And there are good people in Africa, and we are beginning to see signs. Paul Kagame in Rwanda, I am very unhappy that he wants to continue in office, because he would have left a legacy. What Africans don't know is that when people say you should remain on the stage, that is the time to leave. He has reintroduced some modicum of order, because people who are corrupt are punished. It can be done. Here in Ghana, I do not know the details, but during the short term, in the first early days of Jerry Rawlings, there was a sense in which he tried to make sense. Of course, longevity in power may have made him do certain things that were not quite proper, but there is a sense in which there was some order, some discipline. During the early first years of Olusegun Obasanjo in Nigeria, in the early days, there was an attempt to do good. During the early days of Goodluck Jonathan, there was an attempt to do good. But then they get ensnared by these corruption networks. Nyerere of Tanzania, everybody now believes that Nyerere is one of the few leaders who lived by example. But people must make a personal decision, a personal choice. And I can tell you, when you make the choice not to be corrupt, the tragedy is that you are in danger.
Is there a perfect political system? Wrong question. What's the best approximation of a system? Because I'm listening to you, I listen to Ethiopia, Rwanda, Botswana. The way we've been brought up, different systems will work in different places, but there's this sense in which people feel democracy. What happens in Ethiopia, some people will not consider to be a proper democracy.
That is something that I want to speak to in the evening.
Okay, so just a sneak preview. So what's the best?
But my own view is there is no one size fits all.
Okay.
This idea, and Europe is very clever in giving us something that they call democracy. Because these are things that work for them, and even in their own countries is not uniform. If you go and see what is happening in Sweden and compare it with what is happening in Spain and what is happening in the United Kingdom, they are different. Every community and every people has a way of conducting their affairs. In fact, part of the African problem, when I think about it very deeply, is that the African has been taught to run away from himself or herself. That is our constant desire. You know, and this is something that I can say in this setting, and I see it quite a bit in Africa. and I must apologize to the ladies when I'm about to say this. The wig industry, for example, the desire by African women to run away from their God-given hair has created a multi-billion-dollar industry. Hair from dead women in Europe and America, and hair from monks in India and Asia.
Lord.
And that is a tragedy of gigantic proportions. Africans must begin to accept who they are. And I give that example because the manner in which you do little things determine the manner in which you do big things. So even this democracy, I've just been listening on television, your politicians saying, we want a new register of electoral register because Togolese are in our register. That is the same thing we keep talking about in Uganda. Oh, Somalians are in our register. The Tanzanians are complaining, Kenyans are in our register. The Ugandans are complaining, Burundians are. So, in fact, when you listen to the politician in Africa debating, you just need to substitute to Ghana with Kenya. It's the same thing. In African, politicians never lose election. The opposition will never lose election. The election will have been stolen. That is what is standard in Africa. We have not lost. The vote has been stolen from us. Africans must come and reason together. Reason together, because many Africans want power because power is the guarantor of wealth and the means of acquisition of wealth. There is no selflessness. And until the day that Africans recognize that leadership is about service and that there is no one-size-fits-all democracy. You know, we think that democracy is periodic voting. This is the confusion, that every year we go and vote. And therefore that is democracy. Democracy is a lot more than that. And I'll speak to it in greater detail tonight. Because I think the day we recognize what democracy is, a la Africa. In Tanzania, I said something that I remember, that Africans are very interesting people, including myself. Even the plantains that I've eaten in the hotel, some white person will come here and say these are now Stockholm plantains. And once they have Christian Stockholm plantains, then we'll want to buy them. These are now plantains from Stockholm. So that is the problem of Africa.
I have a final question for you, and I'll take a few quick calls. And I think we should move the program to the stadium. At this rate, we should. What is your approach to education? I'm asking this question because a lot of people go through a system and somehow that system makes them think the way they think. You're educated in Kenya, but you've had stints in Belgium, you've had stints in about 4 or 5 countries as part of your upbringing. And yet, your thinking is rather different. So, use that to tell me how we, the recipients of education, first and foremost, should assimilate what is being taught us, and also how the crafters of educational policy in Africa should train the next generation of leaders.
I'll answer that question by making reference to a book written by a Kenyan novelist, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the book The River Between. In The River Between, the main character is called Waiyaki, and he tells Waiyaki, go and learn the ways of the white man. Come back with it and change the lives of your people. My understanding of education is that education gives you the ability to discern. So the education that does not give you, that does not change you, that does not give you the mental ability to determine what is in your best interest is not good education. The problem we have with education in many Africans now is that it produces examination passing machines. All young Africans want to get A's and A stars because education is for livelihood, not for life. When education is for livelihood, it means that you want to produce a lawyer who will get a good job and earn a lot of money and buy the Range Rover, a doctor who will do the same thing, an engineer who will do the same thing. But true education must change you so that when you are a lawyer, you see yourself as a warrior for justice. When you are a doctor, you see yourself as a healer. When you are an engineer, you see yourself as a creator of things. There is a crisis of education in the entire Africa. And we must begin to ask ourselves, what kind of chemistry are we teaching? What kind of geography are we teaching? What kind of physics are we teaching? What kind of mathematics are we teaching for the best interest of Africa? And countries have done it before. If you look at countries such as Japan, countries such as South Korea, they have done it because they have recognized that education is at the very heart of it. And this must be a Pan-African initiative so that we are in a position where students in Nairobi, Kenya, can come to Accra in Ghana and we solve basic things. Look at agriculture, for example. Why is it that we have people, 1.5 million people, starving in Zimbabwe in the 21st century, and yet we have the rains that we have? So education is something that we must re-examine, and we must de-emphasize examination. We must ensure that education is for life, not for livelihood. It can't be done. Let me start about the things that really annoy me. If you look at, I talked about French fries, and I talked about wigs, and I talked about the beauty industry. These are multi-billion-dollar industries in Europe and America. And the market is Africa. So Africa, which is described as one of the poorest continent on earth, is the biggest market for the things that we really don't need. If you ask, do we need a wig? Do our women need wigs? No, we don't. But we spend precious foreign exchange importing wigs in every part of Africa. That kind of expenditure, if you diverted it into agriculture, the USCD is now sliding. Our shilling is sliding. The Ugandan shilling is sliding. The Naira is sliding. The Kwanza is sliding. All these African currencies are suffering because, as Ali Mazrui used to say, Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. And my view is that we must liberate ourselves and deliberately begin to do things that are in our best interest. If you look at the food industry, in this country, you import goods made by Nestle in Switzerland, milk and milk products. Until very recently, and I'm happy that Ghana has done this, with your cocoa, you never added any value. Now you are doing that. And that is a good thing. In Kenya, we have coffee, but we are not adding any value. We take it out to Europe, they bring it back to us as Dormans or Nescafe. So where are the jobs being created? The jobs are created in Europe, and we are merely consumers. So when you talk about unemployment, and I hear what they are saying, unemployment is one of the most nagging and annoying things in Africa. We are about 1 billion now in the continent of Africa, and over half of that, 70% of that population is in the working age. And our countries are not producing any jobs. Let us look at infrastructure. In Kenya now, in Tanzania, I know this is happening. In Mozambique, this is happening. In the oil and gas sector, who are employed? The Chinese are building our railways. The Chinese are building our gas pipes in Tanzania. The Chinese are present everywhere because they are creating jobs for their young men and women. They are bringing their young men and women, and I'm quite certain they are here in Accra.
Yeah. Oh, they are.
In the construction industry, there are many of them.
In the thousands.
And they are in the hundreds. In a short while, they'll be in the millions. So African leadership must make the deliberate decision to begin to move in the right direction. There are others who will say, this is easier said than done. But it is with the saying that we begin to address these issues. And those of us who have the opportunity to speak about these must now begin to work with those who are doing those things so that we create jobs. Look at your own mining industry here. In the oil and gas industry, who are the leaders? You'll find Talo of the United Kingdom are the ones who are doing this. How can it be 50 years after independence that we have no engineers to help us doing this? Look at your own phone, mobile telephony here in this country. Who are running this? Is Vodafone of the UK. So all the real jobs in all the critical sectors are actually being undertaken out there. Look at the football industry. And I'm quite certain there is no shortage of Arsenal, Manchester United, and all those supporters. And
which I support.
Here in Nigeria, here in Accra, Ghana, you go to Nigeria, Nairobi, Kenya, football is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The league in the United Kingdom produces more money than the entire economies of Rwanda and Burundi combined. If we were to have that as an industry, sport as an industry, it would employ young Africans. So there are many things in which we can employ Africans, but unfortunately the African political leadership is incapable of generating these ideas. Why? Because part of it in many African countries is short-termism and ethnicity. I don't know whether ethnicity is a problem here in Ghana. In Kenya, it is terrible. And once you begin to vote, you are voting people from your tribe, irrespective of whether they are capable of delivering or not. Then you are condemning yourself to wherever you are going, you are destined to go. That is in the world of mediocrity. So Africa can address unemployment issues by being rational about it. There's some program that was done by Ali Mazrui in about 20 years ago called Africa the Triple Heritage. And he gives very good examples. Your own first president, Kwame Nkrumah, you know, the clarity with which Kwame thought was amazing. When he told the Liberians, you have rubber, don't export that rubber. We are going to build a Kosombo Dam here so that we have sufficient electricity to make your rubber into the things that we can export as finished products. And many other things. Liberia is still where it was, in fact worse off than it was 60 years ago. These are employment opportunities. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, the richest resource country on earth, with $34.1 trillion worth of minerals under her belly, and yet it is the poorest, one of the poorest countries on earth. Africa must stop lamentation. The problem in Africa is periodically, Africa has always been amazed and mesmerized throughout history. When the colonialists came, they mesmerized our grandfathers with mirrors and whiskies. That is what they were giving our grandfathers, whiskey and mirror.
And gunpowder.
And gunpowder. Then the Chinese, they left. The colonialists came, and they brought with them the cargo cult mentality. They brought sugar, and we loved sugar and other sweet things. Then they brought clothes. We were mesmerized. Today, America mesmerizes us with little things, and we marvel at them. And therefore we don't produce. If you go into any hotel in Accra, Ghana, or any hotel in Nairobi, Kenya, or Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, half of the things that we are consuming are not from us. And that means jobs and unemployment. And I can't agree more that until we solve the problem of unemployment, we are not going to realize our potential. Mahatma Gandhi, whom you talked about a few minutes ago, used to say that sometimes there are people so poor in the world that unless God appears to them in the form of bread, they would never recognize God. And I want to agree that indeed all this talk that we are engaged in will not make sense to the people who are crossing the Mediterranean Sea until and unless we create real opportunities on the ground. So it is those opportunities, and I would have thought myself that the leaders of Africa would call a crisis meeting in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to discuss the question of migration, to ask why are young men and women willing to die in the Mediterranean Sea and leaving their countries? Why? But you see, they don't. Instead, all of them are invited to go to Beijing, and each one of them goes there in a private jet. You know, I've said it before, this is rather uncharitable to African leaders, but I've said the tragedy of Africa is that those who have ideas don't have power, and those who have power have no ideas. We must reverse the situation, and we can't do it. And even as I sit here, I'm thinking, how can we dramatize it? History has given us people who dramatized it well. And lastly, I want to agree with the gentleman who said we should have these things so often. You know, as a practicing Christian, I normally ask myself when I go to church, am I pure? And I was telling a congregation not so long ago that, in fact, those who go to church on Saturday and Sunday suffer from what I call acquired immune spirituality syndrome, and that they go to church every Sunday to receive their spiritual antiretrovirals. The beauty of them is
to
that
last
they
them
are
for
safe
6 days.
to last them for 6 days, and then they go again and again. So Africans also have a problem which cannot be spoken about episodically. It's something that we must speak and act about. So what we must do is to move in the arena of networking very quickly. And I'm very happy that my good friend Dr. Ansah have a foundation and that they have a movement which is focusing on Africa. We are doing the same thing in Nairobi. We have produced the African Yearbook, which is asking ourselves, what lessons can we draw from the past? So that they can inform the present and future and address the question of unemployment, because young Africans must be meaningfully engaged. And somebody asked the question, which I think is the last question I want to answer. We now have Boko Haram in West Africa. We have Al-Shabaab in East Africa. When there was xenophobia in South Africa a few days ago, I saw somebody sent me and I was up the plight of a young African. When he wants to move, when he's in West Africa, there is Boko Haram. When he's in East Africa, is Al-Shabaab. When he is down south, there is xenophobia. And when he looks to the north, he's drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. Why these organizations are thriving? Because young Africans ask themselves, what does it matter anyway? I'll die anyway, so let me die trying to improve my life. And Amadou Kourouma of Senegal has written a very interesting book, Allah is Not Obliged. Allah is Not Obliged is a little book about a young Liberian who was a child soldier. And they acquire power. The child says that the reason why I love the gun is that the gun gives me power. What I want, I can get. Yet I believe that what must give us power is the mind and the pen. The tragedy is that African leaders do not recognize this. African leaders are incapable of appreciating this, and African politician is incapable of appreciating these little things. And I do not know what we'll do with these African politicians. And until we do something about them, we are not going to realize our potential. And Africa will be the poorer. But we cannot give up. We must not give up. The only thing that remains is hope. But we must do something about it. Lastly, I want to address the question of unemployment by making reference on how it can be done. There is a movie which I commend to everybody. It's a movie about Mahatma Gandhi's Gandhi, done by Sir Richard Attenborough. And there is a conversation that Gandhi has, two conversations which really informed the way India behaves. One is with a white man called Charlie Andrews, just before independence. Charlie Andrews receives an invitation from Fiji, and he tells Charlie, the time has come that you must leave and go to Fiji, and the Indians must remain alone because they must recognize that they can do it without anybody's help. This aid business, Europe and America gives you $1 million and they make noise about it as if they have given birth to you. Aid cannot sustain us. The second conversation that he had was when he called Indians and said, we must ban all the clothes that are made in Manchester so that India can begin to make her things. That was the genesis of the Indian textile industry. As we speak now, our young men and women, when women have worn underwear in Europe and they are unhappy with them, they bring it to our ladies and we choose them at market. And you and me are choosing shirts which have been worn by Europe and America. How can we allow our women to wear underwear and braziers that has been discarded by European women? And yet we are killing our industries. These are the painful things that we must not do. In Nairobi, second-hand clothing industry is alive and well. In South Africa is alive and well. We are seen at markets opening these things and admiring them because they are made by Giorgio Armani and then they are second-hand. And we are killing industry. We must say and talk about this. These things, if Africa is to realize